Voices, the things they said, voices, some from those dead, all the voices heard. Voices, things we say, voices, they're in your head, all the voices heard.
Well, hello, everybody. That was such a tentative hello. Let me start over. Well, hello, everybody. It's Shannon.
And Flo.
And Michelle.
Dang.
I was trying to
This
do
is
the
cool.
tentative thing since you were tentative the first time, because you know Skylar's not going to cut that out. So it's going to be that, and then you clearing your throat and going, well, hello. So
Yeah, well, I wasn't fully prepared. Yeah, so here we are. It's a no Kempa episode. Kempa's in Yosemite.
yes,
Taking in the
enjoying the
sights.
great out of doors.
Enjoying the great out of doors. And Skylar is doing the things that Skylar does when he's not here with us on the show.
Which is
Okay,
supposed to be going to a concert in San Francisco, but then he kind of manned himself out of that because it's a school night.
I have to say, I don't disagree with that. I do, I feel the disappointment, but I don't disagree with the old personing yourself out of things from time to time.
I do.
Literally give away half of every concert ticket that I buy.
Yeah, I see that a lot on your social media.
I get full of ambition and enthusiasm, and I buy the thing, and then the day creeps up on me, and either something happens or I'm just really tired. Yeah.
No, absolutely not. That's not a thing. When I buy tickets to go to a thing, we're going to a thing.
My thought is that it's a sunk cost. So I might, if I don't feel, I'm not going to torture myself to go do something and I'm like, dread. But yeah, but also I get to give a lot of tickets away to my friends, and that's pretty cool.
That's true.
That is,
that's true.
That's nice for the people around you, for sure. So it's the beginning, it's the top of the episode, which means I'm supposed to say to you that if you like what we do here at Voices River City, we would love for you to support us with your dollar bills. So if you go to patreon.com/voicesrivercity, you can give us varying denominations of dollars to support this good work. And if you give us a higher denomination of dollars, you will receive a gift in return, which is a coffee mug and a t-shirt, and also probably a disdainful in-person hug from Skylar. Because he's, that's the thing that he does, disdainful hugs. You don't remember that?
I don't. Why are they disdainful?
Because he's angry.
At life? Well,
I don't know. I think it was a time. It was like a time in the world when he was giving disdainful hugs. Fine, you can receive a joyful hug from Skylar, a sweet summer child. I don't know, something from Kempa, and Flo will give you a hug. Michelle will give you a hug. I will give you a head nod, but I will smoke a cigarette with you. So you can receive,
and I will give you a side eye if you smoke a cigarette with Shannon, because we're all supposed to be helping her quit.
Okay, well, good luck with that, everyone.
Shannon has to be around for a while because I need her, and so my interest in her health is entirely self-serving, and I'm okay with that. But yeah,
I'm making no promises about my nicotine consumption. But you should visit us on Patreon. You should pledge some dollars. If you can't do that, we get it. You don't have to do that. Obviously, we love you just the same. You should also follow us on all of the social media platforms, Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And you know what? We're super easy to find. We're Voices River City. So do that. Today, as you heard, we have our guest host and best bud, Michelle Parasite, here with us.
Hello. Thanks for having me again.
Shit, yeah. Almost anytime, probably. And then you got me and Flo. And what are we going to talk about today? Let me tell you what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the SD8 race, Ashby versus Jones running for Senate. And, right now, I think you should probably on a piece of paper write down who you think the three of us voted for or are going to vote for. And then we'll Flo's waiting for all the mailers to come in. And then we'll just see, if you guessed right. There's a lot to talk about. So we look at her. There she goes with her mailers.
My
There's
mailers,
a lot to talk
I have
about.
a stack of mailers for the listeners.
She also has mailers from last year.
I also have mailers from last time because I love a good mailer. I showed them my favorite mailers from the 2020 election are this one and this one.
These are Prop 19 mailers for those who can't see.
Listen. The Prop 19 mailers won for just hilariousness and general, like, why are you doing this? And I love it. And so as many of you probably at this point know, I like to wait until election day to vote. So that way I get all of the mailers and then I line them up and I decide on like which one is the most compelling, which one has the most lies, which one is the most ridiculous, and which one is the funniest. And I do this every election. It's my favorite thing. So I keep a pile of mailers and I pulled out the ones for this race, Ashby v. Jones.
Yeah, so I think it's probably what you're in for. Our friends and listeners is a lively conversation. I would say that right now is the time for you to hit pause and go grab yourself a beverage, of whatever strength. I don't know if you're listening to this in the morning, maybe it's a stronger coffee. And if you're listening to this in the evening, maybe it's a pint of whiskey
or kombucha.
or kombucha. So maybe we should just get into it. I think we should probably start with doing like a little bit of a breakdown of just like who these folks are. Does one of y'all want to do some candidate intros? I don't even care who we intro first.
Sure.
I can take a stab at Dave. Or did you
go for it? No, I was gonna do Angelique Ashby, so that's perfect.
Perfect. So Dave Jones, who I affectionately refer to as the greatest American hero, Dave Jones. I'm just gonna put my
and who I refer to as Dave Jones in my Mike Jones voice.
Yeah,
so
I'm not even gonna pretend to be, nonpartisan here because I'm a Dave Jones fan. So he starts his career as a legal services attorney defending low-income people. He does that for a few years. He does a very fancy internship at the White House under Janet Reno, the AG at that time. He comes back to Sacramento. He becomes a city council member. He becomes an assembly member representing Sacramento, and then he becomes the state insurance commissioner. He rolls out the Affordable Care Act, large pieces of it, and decides to run for state senate. He professionally works in climate work and climate policy, and he is a pretty great guy. Do we want to go into like some of the policy, some other things that they worked on?
Yeah.
So while at city council, Dave Jones writes, probably at that time, one of the best in the nation, mixed income inclusionary housing ordinances. which requires 15% of all new housing developments, units and housing developments to be affordable, which is pretty awesome. Which later Angelique Ashby would be on the council that repealed it.
Mhm.
What else? He authors the living wage ordinance, the domestic partners ordinance before we had same-sex marriage, community and schools partnership programs. I mean, just a lot of things. He's done a lot of things. He is all in all pretty awesome. I'll punt it over to Flo for Angelique.
Okay, so Angelique Ashby is the current city council member for District 1 representing Natomas. She is a graduate of Sac High, and she got her bachelor's degree in sociology from University of California, Davis, and then she earned her JD from the University of Pacific McGeorge School of Law right in Oak Park. She has 3 kids. She's married to a gentleman named Zach, who I believe is he works in emergency medicine. I think he's a nurse.
He's a nurse, yeah.
And they have 2 children together, and who are like children age. And then she also has an adult son, who she I think raised for 6 or 7 years before she got married, as a single mom. And she frequently talks about how she was a single mom. She was on public assistance. She lived in low-income housing. She used food stamps during the time that she was in law school. She previously worked in, I believe it was I'm trying to remember if it was the DA or the public defender's office. During that time, she also has owned a business. She has served as a neighborhood activist. And like I said, for over the last 10 years, she has been on city council. And she also prides herself as having been the only woman on the council for a good number of those years, until Councilmember Valenzuela and Councilmember Vang joined in December of 2020. And she also, I believe, is the only person who gave birth while in office. And so that's another thing she talks about. So she is a self-proclaimed women's advocate, although the Secretary of State would not allow her to put that down as her job title because it was not an accurate description of what she does. She's a city council member. But that is Angelique Ashby.
So these 2 folks are running against each other for state senate, District 8.
Yes. The district currently represented by Dr. Richard Pan, who is I believe he's a pediatrician. And yeah, and he has been in this seat has it been 8 years?
I think that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the races that I have seen a lot. Like, there's been a lot of talk on social media, certainly in the news, in our mailboxes. There's been so many mailers. It feels like not a day goes by that there's not a Jones or Ashby mailer that is in my mailbox. As I'm talking, for those who aren't watching us on YouTube, Flo is holding up all of the mailers for this race. And so I think we just want to take the opportunity, one, to address all those things, to give our takes, to talk about the race a little bit more in depth, just sort of unpack what's going on, especially after a week like this one, where the Bee published a story about Ashby giving the city has a suite at the Golden One Center that is very wonderful. I don't know that from personal experience. I just know that when you are in a sports center and the word suite is attached to anything, it's generally an excellent experience. Ashby gave use of that suite to some folks that, like, you know, maybe she shouldn't have. She also just last night voted yes for City Manager Howard Chan to receive a 7% raise,
A $27,000 raise.
which is retroactive for 10 months. So retroactive to February. So she voted yes on that. That was I think the last item on the council agenda last night. And this just days after City Manager Howard Chan publicly endorsed her on his Facebook page.
Saying it's not something he usually does, but he definitely needed to weigh in on this race.
He had to. He was up for that race.
He absolutely had
to say something.
So not only I don't know if anyone watched the council meeting, but they trotted out the senior
department
staff
heads
to make them all stand up and like say, "Yay, Howard."
Okay, but when you say they trotted out the department heads, Ashby called them out and asked them to stand.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the type of thing that she does, though.
Right. So I think, you know, there is a lot of talk about, I think the sort of like the hinge in this race is, especially for people who find themselves on the left, you know, for progressives, the conversation is, why would we endorse or vote for Jones over Ashby? Because this has been a thing. It's been a thing that's come up all over Twitter. It's a thing on Facebook, where it's like, why aren't we voting for the woman candidate? You know, hashtag for our daughters.
Yeah, I have been in the Capitol, and there are no parts of the Capitol or the legislative process that you work with your vagina. I think representation matters, but not at the expense of values. It can't be that, right? Like,
Of course not.
She's going hard on the woman thing, and that's important. Of course it's important, but it can't be the only thing. Like, I find that particularly in her advertising, she's like pretty deficient in talking about what she's actually accomplished.
Right.
And for people who've been watching her for a long time, a lot of it rings like bullshit. Like, calling herself an affordable housing advocate is laughable. You know,
100%.
she came into office, she was sworn into office in like November of 2010. The point in time count in 2011 was 955 people. The point in time count this year is nearly 10,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, you know, what did she do? What did she really do? I mean, she says,
Right.
I want housing for women and children, and that's great. But we don't just house like the deserving, sympathetic poor. They can't be the only thing we care about.
Yeah, I think there's a real toxicity that comes with her messaging, because it is so specific to her being a woman who cares for women. But actually, when you look at her voting record, when you look at, like, you know, the narrative of which she is a part, she is consistently making decisions that harm Black and brown women. So this is not to say that Angelique has not made decisions or participated in action that has supported, you know, or helped poor women. Certainly she has, right? Certainly she has gone out and helped people get into shelter, or you know, she's helped with, you know, finding missing children. She's helped with, you know, she has certainly helped in, you know, in very circumstantial ways. But we are talking about a person who when you look at the landscape of their decision making, their policy choices that affect entire communities of people have been incredibly harmful. Like, from being on the council that was like, fuck inclusionary housing ordinances, to bringing the most recent like critical infrastructure addendum to the council, I mean, we can talk, we could probably fill like many hours of conversation with how
Yes.
this one person who is a city council member has like directly harmed people because she has made poor policy choices.
Yes, absolutely. I'm really trying to figure out how I want to say this because it bothers me so much. So there's a back and forth on Twitter that we had with someone who I think listens to the show, but certainly is, involved in Sacramento. Because the allegation was sort of that it's mostly men coming after Angelique. And I would say, first of all, if you haven't read any of the Sacramento Sister Circles voter guides, which, by the way, Angelique, if you're listening, I didn't write the sections about you. You'll never know who did because we don't divulge that information specifically, but it wasn't me. And so that's first thing. But we have been for years talking about the problem that is Angelique Ashby. It is not new. If you go back on our voter guides, going back years, and that is like, 2016, 2008, like we have talked about Angelique being a problem, even at the times where she was running unopposed and there was really nobody else to choose. So Black women have been calling this stuff out for a while. I think, the other thing that bothers me about this is, I think many of you know, my dad died very unexpectedly when I was almost 12. And so for, the last almost 30 years, my mother has literally been a single mom, and has not, in the same way that Angelique, for the very short 6 years, probably 4 of which she was actually a single mom before she started dating and then married her husband, like, she just has very opportunistically left out the fact that most of her oldest son's life and all of her other 2 children's lives, she was not a single mom. And that it's been well over 20 years since she's been a single mom. And that I would expect somebody who had that experience, however short it was, and who talks about it as much as she does, to actually then pass policy that would benefit single moms. Right. Especially the single moms who often don't tout themselves as single moms because they get pushback for it because they're not white women. And so when we hear single mom and the person is Black or brown, we assume that we assume a whole lot of things about their circumstances, and it's often not positive. And I remember when Holly Mitchell was in, the Assembly and Senate and would talk about being a single mom, and she was not being revered for it. But I also could look at her voting record and show that she really cared about people who came from the same circumstances as her. And so it's frustrating to watch Angelique apply this very whitewashed lens and once again kind of take advantage of and the privilege of this identity that, I'm not saying she wasn't a single mom for a short time, but it's a really disingenuous label to use as often as she does when it's as old as it is in terms of her identity and when her politics don't line up with it, because she's essentially convincing people to believe that she cares about things that her voting record shows she doesn't really care about. So I think that's one piece that I just really have to lift up. I think the other thing that is particularly frustrating is the way in which the voices of opposition are not being engaged on merits. So
yeah,
when we say Angelique has been harmful to women, let's talk about a very recent race. And I don't think this has been discussed really publicly, but Angelique Ashby did not support Alana Matthews when she ran for district attorney. You won't find that anywhere because Angelique was too much of a coward to actually say so directly. So when people asked her, she would say, yeah, Alana and I went to law school together, which is a pretty, crafty and tricky way of making it seem as if you're in somebody's camp, but not actually answering the freaking question. Okay, so that's first thing. But it would be one thing if she took a neutral position, but she supported Tien Ho and, behind closed doors, and then badmouthed Alana to anyone who would listen. And we have that on good authority. So, people have come up to us and said, oh yeah, this is what Angelique said to us about Alana, right? So the idea that here you are supposedly the women's advocate, so much so that you wanted that to be your title on the ballot, and yet you had the opportunity to support a woman for the only countywide office that would have been held by a woman, and you didn't. And listen, everybody's entitled to make their endorsements. I've gone after people for their regrettable endorsements, but she could have a reason. But the reason why I call BS is because in 2018, she and the entire city council endorsed Anne-Marie Schubert for DA, a Republican woman who has not done nearly as much as Alana has for supposedly the thing that Angelique claims to care about. And so that one really made me angry because you can find time to fully endorse, back and support, put your name on the line for a Republican harmful woman, but you can't find your time to do the same thing for a Black woman who, by your own admission, you went to law school with, and who many of your supporters were also supporting. And you knew it was a bad look, which is why you never actually came out and said you weren't supporting her. And so that to me was kind of the nail in the coffin for the Angelique. It was like, oh, you are so awful as a human that you don't even have any basic morals. Like that's just icky in so many ways. And I would have respected you more if you just said, hey, Alana, I'm not supporting you, and said, publicly, I'm not supporting Alana Matthews. But to pretend you were and quietly not, yeah, kick rocks.
Yeah, I'm going to take it back a little further to the KJ years. Mayor
Yes.
Kevin Johnson, some of you may recall. Some of you may recall that Mayor Kevin Johnson, had an inappropriate sexual relationship with a child, allegedly, in Phoenix when he was playing basketball there. There's police recordings, there's recordings of the young victim talking about her experience. I was a member of a group called the Sacramento Collective for Women's Rights in 2015 that was trying to hold, there was some, this is pre-Me Too, and things were a lot harder then.
Yep.
Trying to hold, we had some sexual harassment allegations at City Hall, some for Kevin Johnson, some for other council members, and the stories about KJ had resurfaced, and
it was the Deadspin article, right? That came out
so
then,
there was
because that was how I
Deadspin
found out
article.
about it. As
So,
someone who was not following basketball at the time, I didn't know until the Deadspin article came
what's
out.
Crazy, what's so wild, bananas, about this is that like all of those videos and recordings were out before the election, and folks like heard them and elected him anyway, which blew my mind. But then as things are coming back up, the Deadspin article happened and they released a recording of the young woman at that time, Mandy Koba's interview with the police, and that really shook up a lot of people. Like, I can't find a single incidence where Angelique Ashby tried to hold anyone accountable on that dais. Now, maybe it happened behind closed doors, maybe it just wasn't in the news, but for someone who supports women and children so much, like this, I couldn't find a shred of evidence that she ever tried to hold KJ accountable, ever tried to let him know, like, it's someone who behaves this way, allegedly, trying not to get sued here, someone who allegedly behaves this way cannot be in public office. You can't continue to, and the allegations against Kevin like continued with AmeriCorps volunteers at St. Hope, you know, with the daughter of a tenant in one of his buildings. Like, oh, like all of these allegations kept coming and she was completely silent. Like, how do you say you're an advocate for women and children and not step up for women and children?
Well, I mean, first of all, like, incredibly fair question. And I think it deserves so much more attention than it has been given. But one of the things that we will hear from Angelique supporters is, well, the way that she held KJ to account was to run against him and then push him out of office.
Yeah, that's not how that happened. The community held him accountable and shamed him to the point that he said he wasn't going to run for office anymore. And then she
Right.
stepped forward, right?
Right.
Like, it wasn't, you know, her pushing him out.
You also,
all.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but like the whole, like, we're not giving her enough credit for the really hard work of, you know, running against KJ during this time. Like, that's not this. What that decision does is it just adds to the bank of Angelique self-interest, right? Like, it's not a situation where she's like, I'm going to do what's best for the community, which would be to enter into an accountability process, to like call or to like push him to enter into that process, to call it what it is, to call his behavior what it is, which is fucking atrocious. But she doesn't do that. I mean, like, time and time again, we find her in these situations where she just kind of sits quietly on the sidelines and then jumps in front of the spotlight after the community has done the work. And then is like, I'm a woman, yay, vote for women, hashtag for our daughters. I can't.
I mean,
I don't know.
I mean, you raise really important, you know, issues, Michelle, and I know, you know, a conversation that certainly happened. You know, I found out, as I mentioned, when the Deadspin article came out, and at that point, I was involved in Indivisible, which was the Black collective that KJ was running, and I was actually chairing the health work, and so I left. And I shared with two of my Morehouse brothers worked for KJ at the time, and I sent them the article and I said, you know, some expletives, essentially, like, what is this? And I said, you know, I work in maternal, child, and adolescent health. That's my background as an epidemiologist, and I no longer feel comfortable being affiliated with this person. I didn't know about this because, you know, of my age and the fact that I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We didn't have a basketball team, so I didn't even know when I first got here. People were like, Kevin Johnson did this. I was like, is that a friend of yours? Like, why are you saying his name? Like, I should know him. Like, who is this person, right? So I'm not a longtime basketball fan. If you weren't, you know, Michael Jordan, I probably didn't know, you know, or Shaq, I didn't really know who you were. And so I found out about this after already being involved. And so then I guess, you know, my Morehouse brothers shared that with him. And so eventually he reached out to me and we had a conversation at Old Soul. And I told him, you know, I'm not comfortable with this. I, you know, as a person who, you know, stands up for women and for children and for victims, this affiliation doesn't make me feel comfortable anymore. And so we had a conversation, we had a further conversation with some members of the Sacramento Sister Circle. And, you know, but the conversation didn't go well because he sort of felt like that conversation was all he needed to have. And I was like, no, this was an opening conversation about what restorative justice looks like and what accountability looks like to a community. And, you know, a lot of these girls and women look, you know, in some ways like me, or come from backgrounds similar to mine. And I'm not just going to, for the sake of you being the mayor, you know, participate in this way. And we were very clear about that with him as a collective. So when I think about what accountability looks like, we were not sitting, you know, elected officials. We were just members of a collective that had maybe a few thousand members online. And were going about our business. This was probably even, I'm trying to think if it might have been just as or just before we started even the voter guide. And so we didn't have a whole lot of like political clout. We didn't have a whole lot of, organization besides the Facebook group and us getting together once a month. But we thought that was important. And I think, if Angela didn't know how to do it, there are tons of groups out here. She really is a women's advocate that she could have turned to and said, I'd like to do this and I don't know how, and leaned on their leadership.
Here's the thing. The folks at that time, so Daniel Conway, the person who was pushing forward the anti-homeless Measure O, was KJ's chief of staff at that time.
Yep.
And do you know who they hired to do the hit piece against Mandy Koba and do like the deflection? America's Landlord, Steve Maviglio.
Of course.
And you know who Angelique Ashby has hired to do damage control? Steve Maviglio, right? So Steve Maviglio, if you Google this, just Google Steve Maviglio, Mandy Koba, you will see quotes in the newspaper about how with Steve Maviglio saying whatever, politicians in Sacramento get drunk and act crazy all the time. Nobody cares what KJ did like 10 years ago or whatever. And I'm like, really? Nobody cares that he stripped down naked and got in a shower and then into bed with a child?
Yes.
I'm like, for real? Like, nobody's going to care. So again, right, pre-Me Too, it's amazing what people tolerated from electeds and their seconds, even a short time ago. But that Angelique Ashby would actually hire this guy who defended KJ when all of this is going down is extra gross.
Were there no qualified women, Angelique, to do damage control for you? Or was that who Big Oil gave you money to be able to hire? Like, I'm really just confused.
I mean, the issue, it continues to go back to the issue of like, there is a lot of tokenization of women's issues, also Black women, Black people that come out of the Ashby camp. Like,
yes,
it's only here's the thing, is that she is smart enough to know when to like, maybe it's not smart enough. She is manipulative enough to know when to like bring certain folks into the conversation and when to bring certain things up like in her communications. But she will do that over and over and over again. But when it matters, at the end of the day, when it matters in terms of policy choices, when it matters in terms of giving audience to people with like very like merit-filled concerns about her leadership, she will not do that, right? Like, so that's what, like, it goes back to this like fucking toxic campaign that she's running that pretends to give a shit about women, that pretends to give a shit about specifically Black and brown women, but at the end of the day is still continuing to silence and actively participate in the erasure of their voices in this community. Because it's all about elevating. Like, I'm not saying that Angelique doesn't give a shit about women. I think that she does give a shit about women, but she only gives a shit about women who look like her.
That's the caveat. And so I need her to say, I am a white women's advocate, a middle-class white women's advocate. And then I would have no problem with her because she would be honest, but she's not willing to do that.
I mean, we even take that to like, if we're talking about like issues of homelessness and housing, right? Like her policy choices are so like, they're so in line with upholding just like the systemic racism that exists in this community, which is like, if you can show up in a certain way and behave in a certain way, and if you look a certain way, then yeah, you can have this shelter bed or this motel voucher or whatever. But if not, sorry. And I'm sorry, but like, we find ourselves in this space. I think this race, there is truth to the argument that's like, this race has like become deeply personal. And I think it has in so many ways. It's hard for something not to become deeply personal when we're talking about silencing Black and brown women's voices. But I think the other thing is that you have people who are like people who are personal friends with Angelique outside of her role as an elected official, being like, but she is so cool, like, and she will help anyone, and she's like a shirt off her back kind of person. But
Yeah,
that's not like,
we need
that's
to talk
not
about that.
it's not why we vote for people,
No, it
right?
isn't. And she's really good at cultivating the young Democrats in Sacramento, like the
Yeah.
the young Democrats of Sacramento County, Dems. There's like these groups of young people, and she's reaches out to them. She makes them feel important. She makes them feel special. She helps them.
She
get
says
jobs.
people's names. She says
She
thank you all
she
the time.
pays
She's really
them.
good at
She
that.
pays them like, you know, small stipends to work on her campaign. Like, this is how a lot of electeds, like, you just build like a crew of people who are like deeply devoted to you, and it doesn't have anything to do with your policy, and it's all relationships. And that's, I guess that's smart, but it's not
It's manipulative.
Yeah. So
not a reason to vote for her.
Let's talk about her policy though, because I think it's really important that we get into this. So, you know, when it came time to, when Measure C was on the ballot in 2020, she again came out against it. Measure C was rent control, or real rent control in the city of Sacramento. She came out against it. She came out recently in support of adding schools to the critical infrastructure list so that they could be places that could be swept, so that people experiencing homelessness can't be near them, which there are a lot of schools in Sacramento, so that really like significantly impacts, you know, where people can rest, and we know we don't have enough shelter for people right now. She did not support affordable or the living wage work, even though she will claim that she did, but she did not. When the mayor put out the charge for everybody to find, you know, shelter in their districts, she initially refused to do so, and then came around to doing something for women and children only, which on its face seems helpful, but that creates a lot of barriers for families. And so it, you know, I think especially as a Black woman, when I hear things like that, I'm like, oh, this is another structural opportunity for you to split up families. So if we have an intact family that wants to move together, we can't, because you're saying that that multiple people in this, you know, family may not be able to go. If there are any adult men in the family, maybe, you know, adult, you know, siblings, or adult partners, they can't come with a family. And so it's just a really, you know, I'm not saying that there aren't spaces that can be designated for women, but the idea that we are in this space and that's where she landed. There are just so many examples. And so what I found really frustrating about the conversation that we were having, you know, on social media about the time when there was this person who was essentially, you know, targeting and harassing an encampment, and that some of the, you know, direct service providers reached out to Angelique to be able to get some support, and it was great. She was able to get that person removed without disturbing the encampment. But her job is a policy job. She is not a direct service worker. And so a better opportunity would have been for her to write an ordinance that would have duplicated whatever she did in that moment to make sure that all of the encampments were afforded that level of protection when a similar circumstance came about. And that's the type of thing that she misses out on the opportunity for. So she's happy to jump in for these, what I call photo op opportunities where, and she may not have taken a photo, but I just mean like it leaves a lasting impression on the people that you were involved with, and she can swoop in and be the hero for the day. But the hero we really need is somebody who says, this is a policy need, and we're going to put something in place so that when I'm gone in December, that thing that I did that worked so well will persist without me. And that's a thing that time and time again, I don't see her doing. You know, when it comes time to be able to talk about when the warming centers are going to be open and what the threshold is going to be for when we you know, open up the cooling centers and all of those kinds of things, she's nowhere to be found. And she's not defending the people who are most vulnerable in our communities. And so I have a real problem with offering someone who is not deserving a promotion.
Well, I think we also, like, we have to go back to, well, for me anyway, when I think about voting, I think about a person's consistency in terms of their leadership, right? So I have consistently witnessed, because I watch council meetings obsessively, I have consistently witnessed Angelique make decisions that harm people, women. We can bring that up because of the whole women's advocate thing. And I have very infrequently seen her like boots on the ground doing that, like direct service, right? And as you say, Flo, like she's not a direct service provider, so that's a thing. But like I think the reason that stands out to me is because it's really easy to use these one-off experiences that people have with her. I think it's really easy for us to be like with anyone, right? Like you have a super like good time with somebody at a bar and you're like, I really want to hang out with that person again. And then you hang out with them again and you find out they're a total asshole because you were like actually hanging out with like a different version of that person because, you know, you were hanging out at a bar, whatever. Like, yeah, Angelique is really good at like showing up to get shit done in these like here and there moments. I think also because she understands that she is going to be able to leverage that action at a later date to make herself look like a better leader than she actually is. And I don't know if Angelique is a shitty person. Like I don't know her, but I do know that she's a shitty leader and that this community, like in such a time as this, needs someone who consistently shows up to do their job, which is the policy work.
So let's talk about that person, because I think Dave Jones is not just not Angelique. I think he's actually a good option. And so I'd like for us to close out having, you know, talked about all the things, what feels like a quid pro quo with Howard Chan coming out and and saying, oh yeah, Angelique, and then her voting to give him a $27,000
How is that
raise.
okay?
I just like so many of these things are just like, y'all really like living on the edge. Her giving out these box seats to all of these leaders like that she was trying to court for endorsements. Like it's a mess. So I think we detailed the mess enough. Now I want to get into the like, Dave Jones is a good candidate. And has really been on the right side of things and has demonstrated, I think, in a lot of ways, some real like leadership around when he was insurance commissioner, you know, and even the ways in which he learned from past mistakes. You know, when I asked him, you know, up front, like, so are you going to take, you know, police money and that sort of thing? He was like, in the past I have. And he was like, but I don't feel that's the right thing to do anymore. And so I don't, you know, and he was like, and I kind of learned that lesson when I was insurance commissioner and I didn't take insurance money because I needed to regulate that industry. And that was really important. And then I started rethinking, you know, the ways in which I fund my campaigns. So that's just an example of the type of person that he is and being able to learn from, like, I don't have a purity test. I don't expect you to be perfect, but I do expect when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
And I feel like Michelle wants to to add in some things about Dave?
I do. And I've been getting to know him a little better. I've been throwing events for him at my house. Let me just start there.
Yeah.
And he comes to these events and he doesn't have to. And he stays and he talks to everybody. Even when there's like 5 people left, he's still like talking to folks. And he wants to hear about what they care about. He wants to hear, what their concerns are, like what their hopes are. And it's not bullshit. He's not like, when someone is glad handing you, and he just doesn't do that. But we were talking on Monday night about why Jerry Brown supported Angelique. And he wasn't entirely certain, but he had a guess that maybe it was when he was insurance commissioner, the then Governor Brown, didn't want drug prices to be quite as low as Dave thought they should be, and put his foot down and basically just said no. So Dave reached out, all across the state to different newspapers and asked them to do, editorials about why we needed cheaper prescription drugs in the Affordable Care Act implementation here in California, undercover California. And it worked. And that pressure helped move the governor. But also, Dave thinks, maybe that's why, but that he is willing to step out and do something like that, right? So I'm an organizer in my heart, right? And that is just good organizing, right? You're trying to change public policy, change someone's opinion about something that really matters, and you take risks like that. And so it meant a lot to me that he was willing to take a great personal risk to his career at that time, because that's going to follow him forever when you make a governor mad, to do the right thing. Right. And anybody who starts their career, in legal services with low-income people, spends, I think he was in legal services for 8 years, that's a day in, day out, defending people from eviction, helping people, get by in a legal system that is not designed for them, right? We have all of these laws in America, right? And almost none of them apply if you can't afford to enforce them personally, right? Unless, it's criminal law, right? All of these civil laws, there's nothing that you can do if you don't have money. And that's what a legal services attorney is for, to help people who don't have money enforce their rights. And I think that experience has influenced every other part of his public life. Because when I talk to him, I watch him and I hear him say the things and I'm like, oh, you've really thought about how this is going to affect low-income people. You've really thought about what is going to happen, if we do X, Y, Z. And I just don't, I try not to even compare him to Ashby. They're such different people. But totally. People who know me well know that I have endorsed 3 candidates in my whole life. So, and he's one of them. I just have a lot of faith in him, and I'm, fingers crossed. Maybe I'm a sweet summer child having faith in any elected, but I do have faith in Dave.
Yeah, I'm again not a native Californian, so I became, familiar with Dave when he was insurance commissioner, because it was right around the time that I moved to California and really started trying to figure out what's going on in this place and who are these people and what's happening politically. And I worked at the Department of Public Health, and the Affordable Care Act was actually one of the first, policy pieces of legislation that I worked on in terms of helping to submit the testimony to the Institute of Medicine for the preventive services for women. And so was paying really close attention to what was happening with health insurance, and a lot of, Dave's career moving forward. and was just really appreciative of the way that he fought to make sure that the protections that were supposed to be in place were in place, that, you know, the premiums were what they should have been, that, you know, when we think about like, some of the small employers and making sure that they were complying with the Affordable Care Act, because that was a big deal. And, you know, there was just so much in the way of both money as well as policy that he championed that was very clearly in the best interest of consumers like you and me. And to me, that said a lot, because there were so many other states and so many other people, even within this state, that were trying to move in the opposite direction. And I really felt like he sort of stood up as like, you know, a really grounded, like, you know, staff in the wind that was blowing around, that was like, no, this is what we need to do. And that's the kind of advocacy that I want to see. And I think he's shown up in the same way when it comes to, you know, reproductive health, which is obviously a major concern right now nationally. Hopefully it won't be as big a concern for us in California after the passage of Prop 1. The you know, freedoms that we enjoy right now will be codified in the Constitution. But I just think about what I want in somebody who is going to represent me, is someone who is going to really think through issues, and be unafraid, or maybe even be afraid, but stand up to that fear, and still try to champion and do the things that are in the best interest of the people who often don't have, you know, major interests in lobbying and dollars and all of that. And so that really says a lot to me about who a person is when they are standing up for the people who can't pay you. And have nothing to offer you, right? Like that to me is the best example of character, because this person has nothing to give to you, nothing to enrich you with, nothing to do to benefit you, and you still view them and their interests as important. That's character right there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that like there is something huge to be said for a candidate who has, for one, just a history of policy that is so inclusive and really leans toward equity. And I think that especially in the time that we find ourselves, like, we need somebody in that seat who is able to look at all of the things that are put before them and think about the person who has significantly less in terms of access and resources, and think about like the person with the most barriers, does this work for them? And I do think that in Dave Jones, we have a candidate who will do that. And I say that based on his history of leadership, right? Like, that's not just because I think Angelique Ashby is not the person that we should be voting for for this office.
Thankfully, it's both and this time.
Right. Sorry, you're gonna say something, Michelle?
Just sometimes you can know a person by who their enemies are too, and that the oil industry is dropping, what are we at now? However many millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Like 1.4 million against Dave Jones. Their most popular message, though, so far in the last few days, Flo may be able to confirm this, looking at her, is that Dave Jones is coming to take your Medicare, like, which is the wildest like assertion. One, because Dave loves Medicare, but also because that's a federal program. Like, he doesn't control Medicare. It's pretty wild to me that you can essentially say whatever it is that you want. There it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing, right? They just
say whatever they want.
They really, all of these like IEs they can say whatever the fuck they want, and they really hope that like you're not paying attention, that you're just reading like the big bold "don't vote for Dave Jones"
Yeah.
and making a decision based on that. And on the day that folks are listening to this, we've got it's under a week until it's time to turn those ballots in, and we know that we're probably under 20% in terms of voter turnout. So this really is the time to, I think, if we're gonna, as we like to do, end with a call to action that doesn't make us want to light our hair on fire. I think the time now is to, like, from my perspective, it's one, to ask your pals if they've voted yet. And if they haven't, and they're willing to take your input to do that, but also really encourage people to lift up the Sacramento Sister Circle voter guide. Because when it is time to vote, we need to be listening to Black women. We need to be trusting Black women. That is not something that is done enough. And we are just like beyond lucky that there is a group of incredibly dedicated Black women who put together a voter guide for this community when it's time to bubble in those votes. So I think it's really, this is sort of like feet on the ground, getting the bug in people's ear, to get out there and bubble in Dave Jones is what I would say.
Yep.
And when you're done reading that incredibly awesome voter guide, go ahead and drop some dollars in the tip jar over at the Sister Circle webpage, because that is hard work, and it's so well written, and it's funny.
It's so good.
It's so well researched. Like I am excited every time I read it, and we need
oh
to,
my gosh, same.
not just tell them how awesome that it is and appreciate them, but show them the support.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
It really is a collective effort. I think there were 30 authors this time around. So when we say it really is a team effort, we really do support each other and talk through, like, so what about this? And what about these considerations? And have we considered, and who should you reach out to talk about this? So it really is a labor of love, and a labor of love for community. So strongly encourage people to check it out. It's a guide. BWAPA is the only of the entities involved that make actual endorsements. We made an exception to that for the Sister Circle with Alana Matthews in the primary, just because we all felt really strongly about her, because duh, right? But with the exception of that, we usually just make recommendations, but BWAPA endorsements are also listed in there. So consider those. We consider it a resource. We recognize everybody won't agree with us on everything. And there are sometimes when we're like, girl, I don't know. Right. Here's our best. Like, this is all, we're gonna lay it out for you and let you decide. But yeah, just hoping that you all vote and tell other people to vote. Local elections really can be decided by single digit votes. Yeah. So it is incredibly important that we all show up for that, and don't let your disillusionment with national politics take away your opportunity to actually vote specifically on propositions and measures, which are policy. You are the decision maker. You're not elected, but you're still the decision maker in those. So really don't abdicate on that responsibility, because there are big things that you may care about that are actually on your ballot.
I also think I want to add a call to action, which is that these days just before Election Day, for those of us who just give so many damns about what is going to happen on Tuesday, these days can be really long, and they can be stressful, and they can feel really intense, and Tuesday can be an incredibly stressful day. And so in addition to making sure that you're voting and your friends are voting, just taking care of yourself and like turning off your phone and getting away from Twitter and just spending a little bit of time like staring at a wall maybe, or reading a book or watching a program, whatever it is that you do to sort of recharge. It's really hard work to be a person who is like so deeply involved in organizing during election time. So take care of yourself, folks. We're so glad you listened. We love you. I also want to say that tonight, on the night that we're recording, it's November 2nd, and it is Dia de los Muertos. And I'm about to get off of this recording very quickly and go sit outside with my altar, which includes Flo's dad and friends, and there's music playing. And so to all of mi gente who are out celebrating and remembering our queridas tonight, or if you did that last night, it's good to be in community with you. And I hope your dia was a celebration to remember. So thanks for listening, y'all.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
I guess
Bye.
that's
Happy
it. We're all
voting.
done. Make sure you vote, Kate. Bye-bye.